them. And I think that happened, you would want to do that for the general public or to someone who's in a position of leadership. If they're not in your field of technology, they're not going to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So that's from the perspective of the communication challenges in general. So do you have a maybe like a behind the scenes perspective on if you have, so among the co-hosts, usually there's agreement on the topics discussed, but if you invite guests, sort of a story that comes to mind as in from a discussion with previous interviewers, where let's say a conflict came up on energy discussions that had to be resolved either during the discussion or somehow trying to find common ground?
Yeah, so our guests have been pretty great. Alex Epstein was tough. He was really a difficult guest. He's like pro fossil fuels make everything better kind of thing. And I had a really hard time with that one. I tried to be like at least civil. That's, you know, going in on the civil front. But folks who listen know that Jigger is kind of out there on stuff. I mean, he'll say things like everybody from New Jersey stupid, and you know, we're like, okay, well, I'm not going to even address that one. But one of the things that he said that he and I have had an ongoing conversation about that I think is something that that a lot of people are thinking about is that he made a comment at one point about people, and it was in the context of folks in West Virginia who had lost a lot of their jobs when the coal industry has died. Well, you know, like the entire state was developed around one resource, and everything was organized. Like if people built nice homes, people built their families around it, and when that industry went away, they were stuck. And he said, why don't they just get on a bus and move to where their jobs? And I really took exception to that because, like, if you own your home, that may be the only thing you have of value at all. And who's going to buy it from you if you're in a place that no longer has an industry? And so I said to him, you know, you can't just expect people to do that. I think what we have to do is recreate a new economy. You have to bring other resources to those communities. The communities are there. They've had generations of people living there. And let's figure out how to rebuild those. And so that's been a really big philosophical difference between the two of us that I've tried to navigate. And he and I have like really good conversations about that. But that's one thing that we just have a difference of opinion. I mean, he's like, let's everybody move to the places where we need to go to spur the economy and build jobs where those jobs are. And I have been, and I'm from rural Virginia, so like I'm on the side of like, let's bring the jobs to us.
Yeah, good. So along those lines, then in terms of the communication message for, let's say if you translated the things that you've learned through the podcast or also through policy discussions, any sort of guiding principles that come from that would help for let's say the mission that we have here at the university in terms of training students and interfacing with stakeholders outside?
Yeah, so one thing that is super important, and I didn't quite internalize it until I had, it's been a multitude of young women have come up to me as a result of the podcast to say, hearing a woman's voice is really important. I hear myself in that. And the whole mission of this university is about, I mean, that was everything. This is why I came, was because any person could get instruction in any subject. And I saw myself in that. It wasn't exclusive in any way. The inclusivity that is this community is so crucial. I mean, I really am offended by the idea that we have to somehow step back from diversity, equity, and inclusion in any way, because I think those are foundational to our society and to helping our society grow and care about each other and care about the planet. But that is something I've taken forward from Cornell, is this inclusivity. And that's been really important in everything I've done in my job. I also think Cornell gave me a sense of like courage. I came from a place that it was like landing on the moon when I came here. I was like, I don't know where I am and who all these people are, and they all have different accents than I do. And so, it's like really really having an open mind, a willingness to continue to learn, a willingness to accept others and to be part of a community is so important. And I'm going to talk about this later. It's like we need everybody putting their hips and shoulders into it right now, guys. And I played ice hockey for a while. If we get the reference there. But I mean, that's what I think from the Cornell standpoint, like that's always, that I've carried that with me throughout. And it was a long time ago when I graduated.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of, from the communications perspective on whether it's with guests or, let's see, talking to different communities on constructively guiding a debate, right? The discussions around the energy transition have become increasingly polarized in recent years. And maybe an oversimplified perspective to say, you know, it's one planet, it's a shared mission, it should be everyone kind of contributing towards that. So there's an idealized goal, but it doesn't necessarily map onto the complexities that we find ourselves in. Any sort of perspectives or guidance as to how to get people to go back to recognizing that it's one planet and one objective?
Yeah, this is so tricky because there is so much misinformation out there and just people pulling data out of their ear that it isn't true. And so my going in is always listen first and hear what they're saying and then try to figure out like, all right, what can I say that doesn't tell them no, but sort of a yes and, you know, what could I add to the conversation that will be not as confrontational if I'm trying to win them over, if I'm trying to actually get them on my side.
Yeah.
And I just started an organization. It just kicked off last week. It's called Common Charge. You can go to commoncharge.org and take a look at it, and you'll see there's nothing on it that looks like solar or wind or anything. It's really about trying to invite people of all kinds to come in and ask questions about distributed energy specifically. And I've gotten calls from all over the place about this. I just talked to a gentleman yesterday from South Carolina, a businessman from South Carolina, who was talking about affordability. And I knew this gentleman is not a left-winger. He runs the Chamber of Commerce for small business in South Carolina, but he does care about affordability. So I'm going to listen to him and listen to what do they need? What are they, you know, what is it that we have in common? And there were actually a lot of things we had in common. And I was able to talk with him about those and try to create some community there. So I think, you know, Cornell is in this incredible community of Ithaca, which I love. And I was a townie at one point because my dad taught here for a year. And so I love this community. The more we can get into our communities, the more we can listen and talk to the people in the communities and the more connections we can make there, I think the better off we'll all be. Because we could easily get stuck in our ivory towers, right?
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. So we'll have more time afterward for Q&A. I think best at this point to move through to give Katherine an opportunity to present the slides that she shared and the rest of the story, and we'll have Q&A afterward. For those of you that are coming in late or that are on Zoom now, I highly encourage you to check out Open Circuit Podcast. We actually have it as recommended listening for a lot of the courses, the energy modules in particular. It's extremely well researched, well organized, and up to date, right? So it's not the same lecture notes that you would have had from last year because it's such a fast moving field. So just a really wonderful resource. So make sure to leverage that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katherine, and we can go from there.
Thank you all so much. This is so nice to be here. That was a good, like, little bit of just a, you know, warming up period there. I appreciate that. And for those of you who listen to the podcast know I use a lot of paper. I have paper around me all the time because I don't ever want to be wrong about anything. And AI has sometimes steered me wrong. ChatGPT is not always right. Just check your facts. Check all of the links. But I really, really appreciate being here. It's really amazing. I was this morning, Tobias and I were supposed to have breakfast, and I begged him, and he was kind enough to give me some grace to go on a little run and walk around campus again. It was just really emotional for me. I haven't been back in a few years, and it was really great to walk around and just see where my haunts were, which was the College of Arts and Sciences. And I thought it might be interesting or different for you all to hear a little bit, because I was an English major, to hear about the transition from that to going into engineering, and then, how does that connect to the work I've done on the energy transition, and why is that important, and how can we think about it in the terms of our own lives and careers and the paths that we take. So I'll blast through these, and then you all can jump in and ask me anything you want. We'll see if I can answer it. But part of this is we're in a period of time that's pretty chaotic, and uncertain. And uncertainty is terrifying. So, how do we kind of bring some certainty to that, and how do we kind of regain our own personal power in the process of it? So I'll start at the very beginning. I was born in Virginia, raised in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is the heart of Virginia. Everywhere I looked were mountains. Mountains are still always my happy place. And I went to public high school, came up here. I had actually come for a year in 8th grade. I went to 8th grade, and in fact, the one class I took in the engineering college here was geology. I had taken 8th grade geology in Ithaca, and I was like crushing it. I was like, I know every rock there. And so that was 8th grade. I got an A+. It was amazing. When I took geology at Cornell, I was like, wait a second, they're all black. They're all black rocks, and they're all the same. And they're like, no, you clearly don't know anything about rocks. That was my engineering. That was the full extent of my engineering at Cornell. But when I got here, from public high school in Lynchburg, Virginia, which my guidance counselor had never heard of Cornell, as a matter of fact. Sorry about that. She was like, why would you want to go there? I got here, and the first thing I realized is that nobody could understand what I said, and they didn't think I was very smart. And I was like, I probably wasn't. I was like, well, they're clearly much smarter than I am. But I first had to code switch and change my accent and talk like a New Yorker. And so I try to moderate at this point, but it was something I had to adjust to. And the kind of the first trial by fire was like, here I am in a place, and I have to be more like the community that I'm in. And I was a creative writing major. I wanted to write and illustrate children's books. That was always my dream. I love drawing. I love art. And I thought this would be the most amazing thing in the world. And when I graduated, I was like, oh, geez, I have no idea how I'm going to eat. Because I haven't actually published anything. I've drawn a lot of books for my kid brothers and sisters, but I haven't actually been able to make any money. So I first went to Paris as an au pair. I was the worst au pair in the history of au pairs. Broke every dish in that family's home, broke my own foot and the kid, just awful. Anyway, but it was great for building my courage. I learned how to be alone a lot. I learned how to speak French. I learned how to curse in French quite well. And got a degree from the Sorbonne in the process. And I came back, and I was like, I need a job, and Lynchburg was not going to be the place for me to find a job. So I went to Washington, D.C. I got a job serving subpoenas at a law firm for $6 an hour, which was not a living wage even then. And I found that I hated lawyers so much. I would never be a lawyer. I'm sorry, I really depend on lawyers now. But lawyers are great people, all of them. But I really did not enjoy that experience at all. And again, building courage, serving subpoenas is not for the faint of heart. But I got a job at the utility. They needed warm bodies, and I needed money. So I got into an apprenticeship program at a utility where I was actually designing distribution systems. And they said, do you know anything about this? And I was like, you know what? I bet I can learn. And so they sent me to the community college to take engineering classes at night. And I loved it. I absolutely loved engineering. I loved figuring out how to build something, how to, like all of these buildings in Old Town Alexandria, I can say, like, I designed the switch and transformer and 12-way duct bank for every single one of those buildings. And so it was really, really fun for me. And it was a transition from being somebody who needed, who was really thinking about how to be a creative person, to being someone who had to be very, very driven by a calculator and, field work. And it was super interesting to me. I really loved it. And you probably get a through line that I don't have a lot of fear. I just figured it out. So what did I learn at the utility? It was like really, really important to me. And it's given me a background that I've been able to take forward through my life. I was there for about 10 years. I loved learning about the distribution system. I loved everything about it. I today walk around looking at transformers. I just love it. I loved listening, bless you. I loved listening to what customers needed. So I would go to a customer, hey, you're building this building. How much power do you need? Like, where can we put this? Where can we site the transformer? I had to learn how to design a vault with a French drain in it. At one point, I don't know why they trusted me to do this, but anyway. But then I also was involved in the first connection that they made with underground water impervious cable. It was a splice, and the instructions were in Japanese. And I was like, all the crew was in the manhole, and I went down and I was like, we can figure this out, guys. So we figured it out. We got it all connected. Nothing blew up. It was very good. I love that stuff. I love designing the systems. I love drafting it. So this is where my drawing came in. I had big drafting paper. I had to draw it. I did do things like, there's a Quaker Lane in Alexandria. I would draw like a little Quaker on it. And the crews were always like, we knew who designed this project. And I loved all of that stuff. I loved also that back in that time, the utilities were super innovative. And this is where the energy transition comes in. At that point, the innovators were in the utility. I was doing ice storage in the late 80s and early 90s. And this was basically like big rooms of ice. But this was all thermal storage way back then. We were doing really interesting rate. We had like time of use rates. We had standby generators. I did energy. I learned how to do energy audits. It was super innovative. And I loved that. To me, that sparked something like, oh, this is something that I can carry forward. The utility is super innovative. Eventually, the innovation shifted to the outside. There was a big shift. But at that time, we were in a real demand crunch because there was a ton of construction going on in Northern Virginia. And we didn't have the juice for it. Not necessarily from the power plants, because we had big nuclear plants and a big pump hydro facility. But what we didn't have was like the edge of the grid stuff. And so all of that was super creative thinking about how do we get people what they need. At one point, the entire Old Town Alexandria was fed out of a transformer at a Wendy's. And I was like, woo, we got to change this, guys. We got to get them some more power. There was not enough juice there. So we were really creative then. What I did not like about the utility was that they didn't like women. It was a really difficult time. I had my first and second kid when I was at the utility. I have 4 kids total. I was called into a room like this. The doors were locked. They stood me up. I was like, pregnant. I hope that motherhood does not prevent us from making our goals. That's how women were treated back then. Would not be treated that way now. But it was that kind of thing. And I tried to get a promotion, and I was told, no, well, they actually were going to give me a promotion, but without the pay and without the title. So actually, it wasn't really a promotion. It was like, we want you to move here, and you're going to have this other job. And I was like, well, there's not really an incentive. I'm not getting a big title change. I'm not getting a lot of more money. What's up? Well, there was a guy who got the job eventually, and he did get the title and the money. But I realized I wasn't going to be able to move. The glass ceiling was very low at that time. There was also a lot of pressure to be political, like to join the PAC and to give money to political folks. You would give your money to them, and they would decide which political candidates would get money. And I'm like, I don't want anybody taking my money. I will give my money if I need to give it to somebody. So there were things like that back in those times in the 80s and 90s were really difficult to try to manage. So I prowled around the actual engineers, because I was like a fake engineer. I wasn't a PE. I prowled around the actual engineers' inboxes, and I found this memo from a guy from the Department of Energy. Mark Ginsburg was his name, and he ran a program called the Federal Energy Management Program, and I went and talked to him, and I was like, I saw this memo from you. You seem like a really interesting person. Do you need anybody to help you? And that's when I moved over to NREL. He hired me through the lab to design an energy audit program for the entire federal sector. So I got because I didn't have an engineering degree, I went and got my certified energy manager certificate so that I could have something behind my name. And I designed this audit system and spent a ton of time going out and looking at facilities. And at the utility, of course, I had spent a lot of time looking at technology. I went and learned how to design outdoor lighting at an outdoor lighting school. So I did a lot of that technology deployment at the utility and at NREL as well. And several years into being at NREL and loving it, loving doing these audits, I started a water conservation program where I had the crazy idea of reusing water to put it $1 million gallons a day on a golf course in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 1 million gallons of water a day. I said, why don't we use recycled water? And they were like, whoa, that sounds crazy. But they did it. They're constantly complaining about how it smelled. And I'm like, y'all just dreaming. But things like that was super fun to do at NREL. And while I was there, and this is, again, like all these technologies that I'm learning about kind of are coming up into, as I go through my career, I'm finding out more about these technologies that are also part of the transition. And one of my girlfriends came up to me and said, hey, I'm leaving, but I do public policy. I'm the government relations person for NREL. Would you like to do that? And because I am who I am, I was like, sure, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said the same thing when I was asked to do a podcast. I have no idea what you're talking about. But I said, yeah, that seems interesting. And I loved it because I could be an expert witness to Congress. I've testified a zillion times. This particular picture is of Kathy Castor and Garrett Graves. She was the chair and he was the ranking member of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And I testified before them a few times. She's phenomenal. She's from Florida and a real believer. And so what I found was that I was able to, as Tobias mentioned earlier, distill really complex ideas into words that Congress could understand. Really, really loved it, and was able to then also look at a whole range of technologies, because I had been doing mostly efficiency and water and energy efficiency at that point, but then I was able to do a lot more. So I had to learn all about the wind side, all about their hybrid vehicle program, which, by the way, all the big three had hybrid technology, and they gave it up to Toyota. they just decided they weren't going to do it, and that came back to bite them. But learning about all of the different technologies, biofuels, et cetera, really gave me a sense of these are all really interesting technologies that Congress needs to care about. They need to think about this. Not just to fund the lab, because my job was to try to get the lab funding, but also just to think about in terms of innovation in this country. We need to be leaders in this. So just a couple of things that I wanted to kind of go through that I learned about on my way that have carried forward to today. And I've been doing public policy ever since. So just a bit, I ran the American Biofuels Association, so biofuels are on there, where we worked on cellulosic biofuels and coal-firing and a whole host of other things that were cutting edge. Now it's more about sustainable aviation fuels, and I'm working on that some. Smart Grid, I ran the Gridwise Alliance, which was the kind of the smart grid organization at that time. It's still in existence. Actually, one of my friends runs it now. Work on transmission technologies. All of these things have come along over time. And partly because of policy. So when I think of policy, I think of here are all these great technologies, these great ideas. What does their market look like? What does their business model look like? And then how do you create public policy that can help that? And policy can be anything from a tax credit, it could be a grant, it could be some kind of a financing tool that's put into place. It can just be a policy to make things easier, to streamline some process in the government that's really difficult. Permitting comes to mind for a lot of things. But policy can be a bunch of different things. It could be like in New York, where there is a mandate for clean energy, for getting to net zero. So that can be a public policy. So those are all the kinds of tools that I had worked on for these different technologies. I've certainly worked on solar and wind. Thermal storage has been a long, friend of mine for a long time. Ever since I was at the utility, I've really been interested in thermal storage. And now I run a thermal battery alliance that focuses on industrial heat applications from long duration, like carbon block technologies. There are a few companies that do that. Batteries has been a big focus as well. And then critical materials right now, back in the day and then now, critical materials are really important, especially considering the battery industry has grown so much. And recycling of those materials is super important. Small hydro as well. I've been very involved in that. There are, I think, like 2% of the dams that are built are actually producing power. So there are all these Army Corps lock-in dams all up and down the Ohio River, the Allegheny River, Illinois, that are doing nothing but sitting there. And so, like, why can't you make, environmentally friendly, fish friendly powerhouse, and power some of those and get some electrons from those dams? So that's, to me, is really interesting. Also geothermal. I know there's a geothermal project here. I'm really excited. That's great. That's very cool. And then advanced manufacturing. These are all things that are like out there that I've been trying to work on, trying to promote and create policies that can move those forward. There's a big manufacturing tax credit that did survive the hatchet that was the One Big Beautiful Bill, which actually I think of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it's not like Thelma and Louise, where it went off the cliff, but it was more like running your car into a tree on purpose, where like some people did okay and some people didn't do okay. So it was like a little bit. It was not as bad as you could imagine it would be, but it wasn't great. Um, so these are all kind of the technologies that have been in my brain all this time, in different ways and along my career path. And now that I think about as, how do we incentivize through public policy? How do we make public policy that can really push these, or just remove barriers, and not prevent them from moving forward? In some cases, you don't need policy; you just need to get out of the way. And so that's been a big piece too. And then there are also, I would say, just social policy overlays that are super important. These are like the mission-based things that have always been in mind, which is climate mitigation, but also climate adaptation. If folks listen to the last show, we talked a lot about Open Circuit. We talked a lot about adaptation. There's not enough, like 90% of investment has been put on mitigation, like trying to prevent greenhouse gas emissions, as opposed to like, what do we do now? Like, is there some way that we need to adapt, and what do those technologies look like? And what do those policies look like? Resilience is huge. There are outages more and more because of climate events. Whether or not you say you believe in climate change, it's happening, and there are events that are happening that you need to prepare for and then be resilient to. And by resilient, there's people talk about resilience in a similar way. They talk about reliability is like, having power all the time. Resilience is like, how fast can you recover from losing it? And so, like, thinking a lot about what are the technologies that can get you back a lot faster. And a lot of those are edge of grid. They're the ones that are in people's homes or in communities as microgrids, community solar, et cetera. Like, how do you find technologies that can really help on resilience? Labor is a big piece of this social overlay. Labor from the point of view of unions, but also just like fair labor practices. How do you get people who are not going to college, like how do you get them into tech school? How do you get them trained? Like I ended up going to a community college for what I had to, for my engineering piece, because I didn't do that in undergrad. And I just had a conversation with the community college, and they were like, "Oh, we love this. You went backwards. You did it backwards than most people do." But that was important to what I was doing, what my job needs were. And I think labor and education are huge components that we can't lose track of. Equity is also crucial. Like everybody, and this has been an ongoing belief of mine forever, is like everybody should have access to the technologies to be able to help themselves, but also to jobs and to being able to be part of that system. And that has been a huge piece of what I've done, is try to work on equity. I helped write the Inflation Reduction Act, a bunch of the pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act, and one of them was this Solar for All program, which was Bernie Sanders had originally, it was like the Million Solar Roofs program that he had been working on forever. And I worked with his office on trying to make sure there were grant programs and financing tools for low-income people to get solar on their roofs. That program was taken down recently. So that program doesn't exist. Maybe some of the states will pick up that work, but that was something that was really important to like making sure that everybody has access. And once everybody can get it, then you've got everybody on your side. If you prevent some people from having things than others, which is happening a lot in our society right now, you end up having the haves and have-nots, and that just creates more tension. And by providing for equity, I think that's like a crucial piece of all of this. And then that leads to affordability as well. So well, I talked to Tobias about common charge, and that's like a big mission of ours is affordability. Rates are going up everywhere, and upward pressure is being put by new manufacturing and in particular new data centers. I live in Virginia, like most data goes through Virginia before it goes anywhere else. And it's really tough. I've got Amazon is building, I live in the mountains, but like not too far from where I am, Amazon is building 13 facilities, 13 data centers. I mean, there are hundreds in Virginia, to be clear, but 13 of them. And I met the guy just by accident who is doing all the power engineering for it. And I was like, first of all, like, oh, tell me all about it. I love that stuff. And then I was like, well, where are you getting your power? And he's like, oh, just from the grid. I'm like, whoa, really? That's a lot of power from the grid. And what's going to happen to all the other customers that are on the grid? Like, this is all going to put upward pressure on prices. And that's going to go down to everybody else. We're all going to be supporting all of this build out. And so that's something that's out there. I think that from a policy standpoint, we have to really, really pay attention to. So just now to flip over a little bit to the transition, I wanted to give you a few slides because a lot of you are probably numbers people and data people. And I would just say, like, when we think about how to communicate, one of my friends told me, the utilities are out there with flags and trumpets, and we use calculators, and we have to come out with another way to talk about things in a way that also uses calculators to back up the flags and trumpets. But so the energy transition, where are we now? Like, you can tell there are like tons of projects. These are all the ones that came on in July of this year. There's just a ton of battery projects. You hear stories about manufacturing ceasing, about projects closing down, and some have. Part of that's uncertainty. Part of it is like if you don't have like a really strong business case and if you don't have a lot of monetary support, the uncertainty can have people pull out. But a lot of them are still going on. And solar and wind accounted for over 90% of new US electrical generating capacity in the first half of this year. I mean, that's massive, and that's not going to slow down in the near term. Solar, wind, and biomass, again, over 90% of the new capacity added. So this chart is just about generating capacity, it's not the actual generation. But you can see that even though other non-renewables are a big chunk of it, solar and wind are huge. And I would just say I'm a terrible chart creator, but wind is more like 12% and geothermal is like 0.5%. So there's like a little bit of fudging there. But you can see there, solar, wind, that doesn't even have batteries on it, that those are still huge in where we are right now. And then, okay. Again, so this is planned utility scale for the rest of this year. 52% is solar. This is in the US. 29% battery storage. It's huge. You get those all on the grid. Wind, a little bit less. Wind has a lot of headwinds, so to speak. Thanks to the administration hates wind with the power of 1,000 suns. But you'll see that, like, really the trajectory is solar and batteries are the game right now. Again, this is new generating capacity. If you look at it over time, you can see at the end chart, solar storage. I mean, where you see natural gas in 2018, look how far natural gas has come down. Natural gas has a real challenge because it takes a really long time to get turbines, like years. They're not going to be able, I mean, the whole issue about demand right now, AI, is speed to power. Yes, it's not going to be speed to power. We're going to have to get solar and batteries and wind too on the grid to really get what we need to get to resolve for demand growth. So where are we going? So really, the data are showing that the combined capacity of all renewables, including small solar, could overtake natural gas within 3 years. I don't doubt that for a second. It's on track to be second largest source of US generation, not just capacity, but actual generation. And then as the evidence of this transition continues to grow, as this happens, obviously. So you can see on here the planned capacity from 25 to 28, how much capacity is planned for PV, batteries, offshore, onshore wind turbines. And I would point you tomorrow, I think the new open circuit is released. We taped on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about offshore wind. It's not dead yet, y'all. You may think it's dead, it's not dead. it's a long-term asset. So just FYI, I think offshore is still going to continue. Okay, where else are we going? This is from EIA. Now, one of the things I'm most concerned about is data, and from this administration, like the destruction of data and the lack of wanting to release actual data. This is okay data right here, but that's why it's important for universities to keep data. Really, really important. But this is their annual energy outlook for 2025, and you can see renewables is growing. That's like a bigger share in 2050, and my guess would be, natural gas may or may not even sustain that much. And I don't really know what's going to happen with nuclear. It is expensive, and I can see what New York State is trying to do right now. It's very, very expensive and takes a long time to build. So we'll just have to see where that goes. But it's not like coal is going to make a big resurgence, y'all. It's just not. I don't care how much love you have for it. All right. But compared to the world, if you look at, and this is from International Energy Administration, IEA, China is building generation a lot faster even than the US. They're crushing us in a ton of technologies. They figured out manufacturing. They're really good at it. And so we are already at a deficit on manufacturing. And part of what the Inflation Reduction Act was trying to do was bring manufacturing back to the US. When it was issued, the folks in the EU just whined and moaned about how it was terrible that the US was trying to bring manufacturing back. Don't worry, y'all, you got plenty of opportunities now. But the manufacturing credit stayed in place with the big, beautiful bill. And we're hopeful that some of the manufacturing will stay here and will not flee. I mean, there's a fear because, not just because of the tax credits, because of tariffs as well, that it's just much harder to invest in the US. Hopefully, if we can wait that out a bit, we can get that going back in the US. But certainly China's crushing us on that. And then if you look at electric generation growing, you can see these are various scenarios, everything from like the ExxonMobil and IEEJ to the IEA's like net zero energy. And if you can see on here, we have solar, wind, like big chunks for solar and wind, and then just natural gas and coal, just always quite small. So I just think, and this is going forward to 2050. I mean, the transition is happening globally as well as in the US, but this is kind of where we sit. And there's another one that shows, okay, this is on battery powered cars. These are EVs and plug-in hybrids. So if you see on the chart, all the blue is China. They're really good at EVs. And then the kind of purpley colors are all Europe, and the green is the US. The US is also lagging on EVs. And that's all that's going to do is come back to hurt us on profitability, economic growth, and affordability. So just, it's something that we're going to need to turn around in order to be competitive in the world. But right now, China has really taken off on the car space. All right, so what does this all mean? Are we depressed or not depressed? So I'm always like hopeful. I'm always a glass is half full kind of person. And it's moving forward. Like it really is happening, even though we have policy bumps, even though this administration would like to think there is not climate change, would like to think that solar and wind should not exist. They're going to anyway. Maybe they'll be more expensive. Maybe some of the policies will make it harder and make them more expensive. They're still going to be cheaper than building almost anything else. So I think that the energy transition is moving forward apace. We just have to keep pushing on it. The other piece is innovation. And I would say what I learned from the utility in the early days is innovation was crucial. Innovation is so much more democratized now. A couple of people in their basement are creating stuff every single day. Like I work with companies that it's like people out of a garage. It's like, that is so amazing that are coming up with innovation. And if you can use AI to do that, that can be even an enhancement depending on the technology. But I think we should use AI as a tool for the good. But that remains crucial. And strong business models are going to survive. I am an advisor to a growth equity firm out of Canada. And they're still investing in clean tech, and they say like we'll invest in the companies that have good business models and can survive without policy initiatives. So those strong business models will survive. Now, there are going to be a lot of folks that a lot of innovators that don't make it because they were so reliant on like government grants that are just going to be really tough to get over the next couple of years. But I mean, they can maybe partner up with those that are stronger. And I think that's going to be really important. Like I said before, affordability is going to be massive. And I think that that is going to create even more consternation in this country as you see a lot of, there's just a lot of people that are very upset about how much things cost. And it will only come, energy will be just as big of an issue. And then the US is going to fall behind without leadership and entrance. And I would say like this entire community is crucial to making sure that we don't fall behind, that every single person here, and those of you who are on Zoom as well, you're also included in this, that it's really, really important to stay engaged, to stay hopeful, to not stop because you see something that, don't stop. If you're researching offshore wind, like you're doing, I don't know, digital twin research, don't stop it. It's still going to be there. Those offshore wind guys spent $1 billion getting 35-year leases. This administration is not going to last 35 years. So it is a long-term solution. And so I would just say we have to keep going and have to be hopeful, and everybody has to stay involved. And then finally, some things that I learned along the way. First is like my philosophy is how hard can it be? Obviously, or I never would have done anything. I would have been scared to do engineering. I'd have been like, oh, it's all going to blow up. But you just have to that was kind of the way I approached everything. All right, here's something that's going to be super controversial. Writing is the most important skill you can have, period. If you can write, you can do anything. I'm a firm believer of that. And that's how I justify my English major. But honestly, if you can write about what you do and you can communicate about what you do, you can do anything. You really can. I got a huge energy prize because I wrote the best application for it. It was like not that big, not that great of a project, but we won the prize because of the way I wrote it. I didn't lie, but it's about writing well. It's also never too late to start something new. I've had so many people come to me. I had a young man who was a Hill staffer. He was a Republican Hill staffer, really incredible young guy. He said, I want you to tell me everything you can do. I started with a napkin, drawing a picture of a grid on the napkin. He was like, no, I want to get in better than that. So I gave him all my books and about the grid and about how to think about it. And he said, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work here, and then I'm going to get this job, and I'm going to get this job, and then I'm going to be a FERC commissioner. And I was like, that's amazing that you have that laid out like that. That is not at all how his life has turned out. It's been different and better in a lot of ways. But like charting your course before you take advantage of opportunities, I mean, let life happen. It's okay. Like let things happen when it's serendipitous. That's how obviously my life has been all along. I did not chart a course to get into clean energy, and here I am. And it's because I love it. And if you see something that you think you might love, go for it. Go with your gut. Like your instincts are so important, and be comfortable with taking risks. And that's really hard to do sometimes because you're trying to think about like, how can I be successful? How can I prepare my life? How can I get housing? How can I get food? What do we have to do that? But taking risks is part of what we have to do. And then I put this up because owning your ideas, like your ideas sound so much better when I rephrase it. I cannot tell you how many people have done that. Own your ideas. And I would say that with a tiny caveat, which is if you're trying to convince somebody of a new idea, getting them to internalize it so much that they decide it's their idea may not be the worst thing in the world. That's called good lobbying. But also own what you do and what you take forward. Don't be shy to put your ideas forward and own them. And then just finally, like making the world a better place is a really long-term project, and it's worth it. But also, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Like, I feel like if there was like one person that listened to my podcast and went off to do something to change the world, that's enough. That's one person, and that is one thing you've done. And I think that that's all you can do. All you can do is try to leave, take out what you brought in and maybe leave something better behind. But it's a long-term proposition. I think it's worth it, and I hope everybody will continue what they're doing and all the good work you're doing. So thank you. Anybody have-
Thank you so much. All right, questions. Great.
Yeah.
Great summary. incredible life story as well.
Thank you. Coming from you, thank you.
A question, you brought up the data centers and
Yeah.
what that's gonna do to pricing, and, you know, here in New York, I'm on the Climate Action Council for the state that sets our energy policies. We're already hearing we have to backtrack, retract, because energy is gonna be too expensive, we can't meet our climate goals, and the data centers are one of the major drivers.
Yeah.
So, do you have any suggestions as to how we handle that?
Yeah. So one thing is like, I think we need policy on data centers to try to make sure that they're efficient, that they become much more flexible load, that they build them smart so that they actually can participate and be resources instead of just a drain. And I think there are things you can do that. There are technologies out there right now, I'm sure that you are aware of, that would be really important. And I think maybe holding them to some, we don't have any policy on this stuff yet, like putting some policy in place on what data centers should have to do. I mean, some utilities are saying, well, we're making them build their own generation facilities. Well, that's fine, because maybe they'll build clean ones, or maybe they'll put in a bunch of diesel gensets like Elon Musk did in Tennessee. But that will require them to at least foot the bill for the generation. But like, why can't we put standards into place for efficiency, right? And for getting them to be part of the grid. I don't know. Have you all thought of?
No, not really. I've been trying to push. But
Yeah. There's some companies that are doing that are interesting.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
maybe. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Sure.
I was hearing a couple mixed messages. I think they're
Oh,
mixed or maybe not.
I can't believe it.
On the role of policy. So we're 8 months into a 48-month administration that doesn't even believe in climate change.
Right.
So in light of that, your presentation was more upbeat than I would have expected.
Yeah.
So my question is on policy. Is it the case in general that there's enough momentum going in a sustainable energy industry, for lack of a better word, that trumps, so to speak, the policy, the reversion in the policy arena? Or does it depend on the technology you're talking about?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what you think about the role of policy ultimately.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a little bit of an and there. So there are a few favored technologies in this administration. Nuclear is one of them. Geothermal is one, and hydropower is another. And geothermal and hydropower have kind of been stepchildren for a while. Like solar and wind and batteries got a lot of really good grants. So did some smart grid stuff, got a lot of grant funding. And so I think geothermal and hydro may have a bit of a heyday. And I just tell those companies, like, just run for the opportunity. That's good. You want to go for that. We have to have more poles and wires and more technology on the grid. And so I think that we can continue to work on. That's going to be really important. I think the other piece is state and local policy. And I'm spending a bunch of time on that too. Like, how do we get policies for the distributed side so that distributed assets that customers can own, whether it's like solar, batteries, microgrids, programmable thermostats, heat pumps, like how do we make those be considered a resource? That's the only way we're going to make this thing work, is if the customer side is considered a resource and not just a drain on the system. Whether it's a data center or a residential customer, everybody has to be able to participate, because we can't just continue to build. We're not going to be able to build gas plants. We will be building more solar, I'm sure, and batteries, but we need to bring distributed power to the fore too. And I think what you're seeing from the solar industry is like a real hard look at what do we need to do to maintain cost effectiveness in the face of diminishing tax credits. And then how do we also make sure that, because of the tariffs, because tariffs are wreaking havoc on the industry, like how do we change our supply chain? So supply chains is going to be huge. Also, supply chains, critical minerals. I feel like there are a bunch of opportunities that we have to kind of like keep pushing on, because if we can keep pushing on those, maybe then after the 48 months are done, we'll be able to like bring the other ones back and knit it all together. So that's how I'm able to stay somewhat optimistic.
Thanks.
Hello.
It's a great talk. Thank you so much. So I guess my question might be coming more, I'm a researcher, and my question might be coming more from the research perspective side. But obviously you showed there's a lot of wonderful work going on around the world, outside of the United States as well. And I was curious what your thoughts and perspective are about engagement outside of the country for at various levels, right? Research, development, deployment, and beyond.
Yeah, like this is a global issue, right? It's the planet, so it's all the way. And so I see a lot of partnerships, a lot of communication globally. It's so important to share research, to bring students back and forth, to have a lot of communication. So like a place like Cornell is really, really important for bringing and creating the global optimism rather than mistrust. Because there's a lot of mistrust in a lot of quarters, and I completely understand it. So I see things like that, like convening, and I was part of. I met a lot of people through. I was part of the World Economic Forum for a long time. I was asked to be a convener and ran a bunch of councils, and through that I met a ton of people globally, and they're off doing amazing things. So keeping in touch with people globally is super important, and that also, I mean, building those relationships also maintain some good feelings, even if you feel like everybody is, going against, that everybody hates Americans, like you can be the American they don't hate, right? Yes, sir. Yes, you, sorry.
I just want to make sure. Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. I was curious, you've had such an interdisciplinary career and seem so eager. It's really impressive how you just jumped from one thing to the next in a very seemingly fearless way. What did you do if you encountered pushback from someone that said, particularly if it's someone from a position of power or authority that said, no, you can't do this, you don't have the expertise, or you're not the type of person that can do X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, so yeah, I've had setbacks. I was fired one time for being a woman. I was running an organization. I was the CEO, and the chairman of the board decided I was getting more press time than he was, and that was like unacceptable. And so they just they got a board meeting, a secret board meeting, and they fired me. And I mean, it was just like that. It was one day I had a job, and the next day I did not have a job. And that was really hard. I'm not saying like there haven't been bumps along the road. Like that was really hard. And I called my husband because I was getting on the train. He was like, "Hey, would they fire you?" And I was like, "Oh, how did you guess? How did you know?" And he was like, "No, that's not at all what I thought you were gonna say." But yeah, I mean, I had to like go back and figure out like what am I gonna do and find somebody, because I've had enough goodwill from folks that I had worked with that I could find it something else. And I ended up creating my own company, which is like, I always say, my favorite place to work in the world was NREL. I mean, the National Renewable Energy Lab was like the best place in the world to work. And I own my own company. So that tells you having your own company. It's like when you own your restaurant, you work 24/7. But I eventually just built my own company so I could decide, and I have great partners, so like really good employees. So I can be like, let's like chart our own path. Let's figure out what we can do. And nobody can fire me.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, you in the glasses.
Yeah, well, first of all, I worked at NREL as an intern and I also loved it over there. It's great. But thank you so much for your talk. I think this was really cool to just hear your life story. And I think something that I had a question about is I feel like currently with the Trump administration and just generally the political climate, academia has kind of been this place that there's a lot of misconceptions about. There's things that are, I guess research isn't as important maybe in the administration's eyes. So I guess the question I had is because research plays such a big role in doing these energy transitions, and also there's a lot of policy that needs to get involved in order for I guess research to come to fruition. Like there's policies that help. Do you think that there's anything that I'm currently a grad student as well, like if anything researchers can do to, I guess, bridge that gap between policy and academia?
Yeah, so that's a big question because there are different places where there are different venues for policy, right? This administration does not want to hear anything that you have to say. I'm very sorry to say that. They're not pro-fact. They're not pro-academia. It's very threatening, I believe, to their concept of the world. So like, that's just the fact. That's just the thing. They are anti-scientist. But that's not everybody, right? So Congress is not anti-scientists. Like you can talk to your member of Congress, got good members of Congress up here. Talk to those folks. You can talk to state people. You can talk to, like state leadership, state reps. I mean, it's really important to continue to work on policy whatever the venue is that you'll be able to use. And I would say, I mean, there's a difference between what the administration is doing, which is saying things that are just like not true, versus people who are, Congress is going along with the administration, but they're still receptive. They're still open to learning. That's like your hope is that you can still communicate to someone who may not have the same political leanings that you do, but you can still get through based on some other piece of information. It could be like, here's how many jobs we're creating in your district. Here's how many people would lose their jobs if you vote for this bill. Here's how many, here's the economic growth for what we're doing here. Here's the potential for innovation. And bring them that and tell your story in that way. I think that's going to be really important. So I would just differentiate between the folks who are dogmatic and the folks who are actually willing to listen and pick your battles.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Maybe now it seems like with the new administration and so forth, it's a good time to think or reflect about maybe mistakes that were made by the clean energy people. I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I guess I think about this and I wonder if there have been mistakes regarding policy versus science and being sometimes a little bit weak on the science when advocating the policy. And one topic, which I'm not an expert on, but I know a little something, and I think you know much more, is maybe this issue of PV on homes. And does it benefit people who put PV on their house to the detriment of people who can't afford it or don't want it, like in California?
Yeah, so first, the utilities have created that narrative of cost shift. But if you have PV on your roof, you are saving the grid and helping everybody in the process. So it puts downward pressure for everybody else for the actual use of the grid. So I still think rooftop solar is like helping everybody. Of course, we want everybody to have it. Now, as far as mistakes, I do think there were some things that were, in an effort to get things done, and we had a lot of money for the IRA, there were things that kind of just, we found were somewhat market distortion. And here's an example. So there was a lot of money that went to these grid technologies. And that's great because you had a new technology, you would apply for a grant and you would go in with the utilities. The utility would actually get the funding. And your new technology would then, de-risk it for the utility because it would drive down the cost of it. It was a 50-50 cost share, but at least the utility only had to pay 50% of it. And so that was really important for de-risking some of these new technologies, for getting you to really be a forcing function for utilities to try new things. What ended up happening is it took a while to get the programs up and running. There were a lot of requirements about labor, about community engagement, and it kind of slowed down the process so much that when the administration flipped over, a lot of those utilities were like, I think I'm going to just bid this project out and not use this innovator. And it left some of these innovators without a path. And I think that we could have designed, I don't know how you'd harden it so that you design it so that the innovation is actually forward rather than, the utility would just end up with like whatever technology they were going to buy anyway, but the government was paying for it. So I feel like there were some protections that could have been put into place on that. Because any kind of grant program where you're picking projects to win is a market distortion in some way. So if you didn't win the grant, if you were out there, you had applied, you didn't win, then you're stuck with a project that you're not going to get funded, or you have to wait for the program to be done before you can put that forward. So there's like a little bit of balance on that. Is like, how do you actually get things done and de-risk them while also making sure that there's a fair playing field, level playing field for everybody. So that's something I would think about. We also, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was not a tax credit for transmission. That would have been really helpful. It fell out at the last minute. I was really mad about that. But that was the utilities that decided that they wanted to be able to charge customers for it rather than getting a tax break. But anyway, I digress about utilities. But that was something that fell out too. So there have been some things that we could do differently or better. mean, we had a pretty limited amount of time to pull it all together in the end. And it was a miracle that this thing got over the finish line. Honestly, I don't know if you remember Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who like had the devil and the, and the angel on his shoulders yelling at the same time. And it was really down to the wire that he actually even let it go. In the end, he out-geniused us all because we got the CHIPS bill and we got everything done at the same time. But it was all dicey to get it done. And I was just grateful that we were able to get something.
So riffing on where you were, again, wonderful talk. I'd argue that affordability is the key to everything. Solar and storage wins now because it's cheaper. Swanson's law is a wonderful thing. So the question is, from a policy historical perspective, do you have opinions as to what policies are best at driving affordability, driving the learning curve, getting on the learning curve in that engineering? Once you're on your learning curve, the market kind of takes over, but you've got to get there.
Well, you have to have access to the market too. Like there are a lot of people that don't have access to the market. So like in a lot of states, you're not allowed to aggregate all these resources. So the ideal, right, would be to take all the consumers that have batteries and solar or whatever thermostats, aggregate those, be able to present those either to the utility or to the wholesale market to be able to actually provide resources and get paid for them. A lot of states, they don't let you do that. They don't let you aggregate. So like, let's unlock all those things that are out there preventing this from happening. And then, yes, you're right, the market will take over. But right now, the market doesn't work for all of those. So I think part of it is like trying to figure out how do we get permission? Utilities aren't going to be able to do all that. They don't, the innovation left the barn a long time ago. I mean, they can do some things. Their job is to run the grid. Their job isn't to innovate on the customer side. So like, let's figure out how to let the customer and you know, the supply side too. Let's let like all the innovators be able to come and have permission to be part of the system.